All right, the lung and the respiration. We want to start off with a pop quiz. And I don't know if anyone can answer me. You can answer in the chat or just think about it. I want to ask, how long can the average adult last without food? What do you think? Any takers? How long can the average adult last without food? Think about it. Think about it. I'm unable. Okay, I see someone says 7 days. Great. Good try. Let's see. Actually, more than that. We can last without food. Someone says 1 month. Good go. But the average human being, so you're more on the in the range with 1 month, some not so long, or 21 to 60 days. So it's a there's a range. All right. So good go. Awesome. About a month. How long can the average adult last without water, do you think? So we see food is about 21 to 60 days. What do you think about water? Any takers? Think about it. All right. That would be about 3 to 7 days. All right. Someone says 2 days. You're not very far off. And there may be people who can't last more than 2 days. All right. Depending on their water content. But how long do you think the average adult can last without air? How about air? Think about that one. I want you to take a go at it. So we see 21 to 60 days without food, about 3 to 7 days without water. But what do you think about air? How long can someone last without air?
Very 5 minutes.
Okay, I see 2 minutes. Great. 3 to 6 minutes. All right. So isn't that amazing that we can last without food 21 to 60 days, water 3 to 7 days, but air just a matter of minutes. And then the body starts to break down, die, and have irreversible changes. Isn't that something amazing? We know that there are situations where persons are trapped in a certain body of water that has some air content, and even though they're not breathing, they still have some air exchange going on. All right, or the water has a good oxygen content and they may be able to last longer than the 3 to 6 minutes. But generally, if a tissue is starved of oxygen or blood, it's just a matter of minutes. It shows you how important air is to the human being. These are my notes that I wanted to share with you. It says every tissue in our body needs oxygen to stay alive and function. All right. It is this starvation of oxygen to any bodily tissue that results in tissue ischemia and loss of function and ultimately necrosis. Air, or more properly said, pure air is the key to life. Pure, pure air, we are said to start being alive when we take our first breath. Even though the baby has a heartbeat from early on in its developmental stages during gestation, we don't say the baby is alive just yet, or has, because they're not on their own as an independent entity. And we're said to not be alive anymore when someone cannot breathe, not when there is no heartbeat. So if we discover someone who may be breathing but doesn't have a heartbeat, we do our best. Even if they're not breathing, we still do our best with CPR to get them back. But it is when someone is unable to breathe independently that they need something called a life machine or a ventilator, which is a ventilator is the most common form of a life machine that you will come upon. And that ventilator breathes for the person. You ever hear about someone who is on life support? Well, it really is a ventilator that keeps them breathing. And whenever you disconnect that and they cannot breathe on their own, they die. All right. So this is how important the action of breathing is. We are air beings. All right. It is when God breathed into man's nostril that man became a living soul. And there is something there that I want to underscore. If air is so important to our physical bodies that we cannot live without it, but up to 3 to 6 minutes, then what is air? What is air like to the Christian? What is air like to you and I? We have a spiritual side to us, and air, we need that. We can't live without that. That is like prayer. Prayer is the breath of the soul. I know you ask yourself, why would one feel spiritually dead? Because there is no prayer. There is no exchange between God and them. They do not have that quiet time where God can imbue thoughts into them and they can pray according to his word and listen for feedback and they can talk to the Lord as one speaks to a friend. If we do not pray, the soul swiftly begins to die. All right, so the Lord gave us two lungs, and this picture here, not entirely correct, but each lung has different lobes. The one on the right has one. They have different fissures, and we can see here that the lung is something that has to be cared for. We're not going to be talking about smoking and all those things, which is obviously injurious to health this evening. That's obvious. We want to be talking about some other things that we may be doing or not doing that can definitely aid or damage or respiratory health. So some foundational truths before we go on, and this comes from the book Healthful Living. We have returned to the book Healthful Living. For the past couple of weeks, we were really being guided by the book Counsels on Diets and Food. Now we've returned to Healthful Living and we're talking about the respiration and the lungs. So some foundational truths that we want to bear in mind as we go along. The health of the entire system depends upon the healthy action of the respiratory organs. So the respiratory organs really carry the weight. Other organs in the body are depending upon the respiratory organs to do their work well so that they can function well. All right. And what are some organs of respiration? I want you to talk to me. Give it a shot. What are some organs that you know of respiration? Well, definitely the lungs. Okay, someone says the nose. So you want to keep the the nostrils of the nose nice and clear, right? Lungs, nostrils, yes. Wonderful. Any other? How about that thing we call the windpipe? All right. Mouth, bronchus. Oh, yes, it's more in the lungs. All right. Well, how about the diaphragm? That very big muscle that is perforated by only two big vessels in the body. The body is so amazing. It allows only the passage of two big vessels. It's great. All right. It's great how God has formed the human body. The diaphragm is that muscle that makes that travel, that excursion up and down so the lungs can expand and so that they can contract to get out air that is less in oxygen. All right. So we want to talk some more about that. Let's go on. In order to have good blood, we must breathe well. How are you sitting right now? I don't know if you're lying down or standing or sitting, but how is your posture? Have you made it a habit to take in full, deep breaths? Or do you breathe shallowly as a habit? But remember, good blood is what nourishes the system, takes away waste, and carries nice oxygenated blood to the tissue. So, in order to have good blood, we must do what? Breathe well. The lungs, in order to be healthy, must have pure air. We'll be talking about pure air. Remember, pure air is one of those laws of health, and you cannot break a law without incurring its penalty. All right? There is always a penalty to bear when the laws of health are broken. That penalty is often sickness and discomfort. Your lungs, deprived of air, will be like a hungry person deprived of food. It's just that there is not that hunger hormone to let you know that I'm hungry. But there are symptoms in the body, both in the appearance and also in signs that others can see and symptoms that you personally will experience. We can live longer without food than without air, as we saw earlier on, which is the food that God provided for the lungs. So from today onward, I want you to think about pure air as the food for the lungs. All right? So these are some foundational truths that we want to put down firmly as we go on. Now, in the book, it talks about tight lacings. Now, we've come out of the Victorian age where, you used to have a corset, and those corsets were actually metal. All right. And ladies would wear them habitually and they would have certain effects. Now, we want to read this because in our time, we have some garments that may not be as restrictive and hard. There's still corset wearing like that in the world, but we do have garments that do pretty much the same thing to the body. Now, look at that picture as I read this to you. It says the compression of the waist by tight lacing prevents the waste matter from being thrown off through the natural channels. The most important of these is the lungs. In order for the lungs to do the work designed, they must be left free without the slightest compression. If the lungs are cramped, they cannot develop, but their capacity will be diminished, making it impossible to take a sufficient inspiration of air. In other words, the clothing that you wear should allow your lungs to expand properly so that it can develop. Its capacity is not diminished and making it impossible for a full inspiration. That's what we call when you're taking a very deep breath. All right. The abdominal muscles were designed to aid the lungs in their action. Where there is no compression of the lungs, the motion is in full breathing will be observed to be mostly off the abdomen. When tight lacing is practiced, the lower part of the chest has not sufficient room for that action. All right. You really, when you breathe, you don't have to see your chest rising, but you can see the abdomen coming in and out. Goes on here to say the breathing, therefore, is confined to the upper portion of the lungs, where there is not sufficient room to carry on the work, but the lower part of the lungs should have the greatest freedom possible. The compression of the waist will not allow free action of the muscles of the respiratory organs. So what can we take from this? We do not want to compress the thoracic region, wherein lies the lungs, all right? The diaphragm, the respiratory organs. We neither want to compress the abdomen, wherein we have the abdominal muscles which aid in respiration, which aid in the movement of the lungs. All right. Often the God of fashion demands this. The God of fashion says, do what looks pleasing to the world to get the world's kudos, but it is not good for your physiology. All right. So let's look at look at this picture here really shocked me when you see, it's a gross demonstration, but you can see the dome-like natural shape of the lungs of the rib cage being changed. The body is very, for want of a better word, elastic. It can go through and take certain compression without breaking. But if that is habitual and done without necessity, whereas in a life-saving circumstance, then definitely that's health destroying. I want to talk about some clothing in our time. You have corset tops, bustiers, things like that. And some of them, they do pretty much the same action. And sometimes ladies don't wear their sizes, and that creates a very big problem. All right. So want to talk about that. I know even bras that don't fit well. All right. That's not good. You're really compressing the thoracic region and you're doing it habitually over time, and you'll know find that you're unable to breathe freely. And I know a lot of ladies, you want to have the shape, and even gentlemen too, wearing waist trainers. Now, I would say if you must do this, do it in such a way that when you put that thing on, you can breathe without any restriction, right? But often it is worn in such a very tight manner as to bend the body out of shape. All right. In order to get back in shape, we're kind of bending it out of shape, if you get what I'm saying. So be very careful when you're using things like your waist trainers, bra sizes. If you should wear anything like corset tops, it's not the same as those tight lacings, but it's very similar because it gives a very similar action in compression to the respiratory area of the thorax. Hope that's making sense. All right, so we're going to touch on a little bit more on healthful dress later on as we consider the respiratory organs and their healthy action. All right, so don't overlook these things. Don't say, oh, that's small. No, you want to address them. Let's look at some causes of respiratory illnesses. As the book states, it says many suffer decayed vegetable material or matter to remain about their premises. There is constantly arising from these decaying substances an effluvium that is poisoning the air. By inhaling the impure air, the blood is poisoned, the lungs become affected, and the whole system is diseased. Let's look about our homes. Not only decaying substances from fruits and vegetables or food refuse, but even leaves. In another book, we talk about leaves. If you have decaying leaves lying around for too long, not taken out, and they can be a source of poisoning the air that's around you. Some of us were more robust and may not feel symptomatic changes as quickly as others, and then others feel it right away. But look about our surroundings. We know when we were growing up, our parents said to us, cleanliness is next to godliness. And while we can't find such a scripture in the Bible, we definitely see the principles strewn throughout scripture. All right, the principle is definitely there. Cleanliness is the gateway to health and also to the recovery of health or healing. All right, so from today onward, let's look about. Here's another one. If a house be built where water settles around it, remaining for a time and then drying away, a poisonous miasma arises, and fever and ague, sore throat, lung disease, and fevers will be the result. All right. So I know in some communities there is areas where water is like there 80% of the time. And by the time it dries away, the rain finally returns, and then it's there, and just step over it and go about our business. But that's a hazard. All right. That's a health hazard, particularly when it comes to the lung. Here's something I want to share with you. This is a little history. Did you know that in 1750, about 15% of the population lived in towns? hmm But by 1880, a staggering 80% was living now in the urban cities, in the urban situation. And that is because of what we call the Industrial Revolution. Families prior to this used to just have their own businesses. Those who made barrels were called coopers. Those who were farmers were called the farmers, and so on. And so people developed their last name based on the business that the family did. But with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, everyone now put down their own family business. A lot of families did that, went into urban areas to work at the factory, all right, to work on the line. And that caused a mass migration into urban areas. But there was no sanitation provided for this great new influx of the population into that area. And so what you're looking here at the screen is a condition of a filth-strewn alley of ill-smelling stables and manure boxes. They used to have streets where they just earmarked to throw their filth. I know this sounds weird because in our time now, we're like, who would do that? But this was what was there in that time. All right. And as we know, this gave rise to so many other diseases. All right. Um, Cholera, scarlet fever, diseases. It just goes on and on, the amount of diseases and what we call the time of plagues in the 19th century. But it was when there was an increase in sanitation and environmental and social changes that we saw that many of these diseases went away. All right. Now, today we do not contend with many of these diseases as back then. Some of them still persist in certain areas of the world, but nevertheless, the point is clear that our surroundings is something we want to pay attention to and sometimes overlooked as a cause of disease. All right. Let's move on. So old air, another cause of disease. I know that sometimes when there's some persons who are sleeping, they sleep with their heads covered under the sheet. All right. And it's just a habit. But that is a debilitating practice. The chronicity of that, how long you've been doing it, can definitely have irreversible changes later on in life. All right. So old air, a cause of disease. Many families suffer from sore throat, lung disease, liver complaints, brought upon them by their own course of action. They keep their windows and doors closed, fearing they will take cold if there is a crevice to let in the air. They breathe the same air over and over and over until it becomes impregnated with the poisonous impurities and waste matter thrown off from their bodies through the lungs and pores of the skin. I don't need to belabor that point. It makes sense if you are able to even sleep with your windows open. I know you're saying, what am I talking about? I don't want thief to rob me. Okay. But even if you can't sleep with it open, as soon as you can, open and allow fresh air to take out that old air and sunlight into sleeping rooms. No sleeping room should be built where sunlight cannot be admitted. The natural sunlight cannot come in. That's never good. You want sunlight and air to be able to rush through your sleeping rooms. And I know it feels very comfortable to fall asleep under the air conditioned system. Okay. It's wonderful. But if have you ever looked at that thing if it is not cleaned on time? Mhm. And for most air conditioning systems, it's a recirculation of the old air. It's not fresh air as in a vent system, for example. So you want to be very careful about these things. Sometimes the things that we boast in for comfort can actually be the things that harm us. So if you have such situation, every day you want to make sure that the old air inside is rushed out and new air with oxygen is welcomed in. All right. And if you can sleep, having fresh air coming to you, we'll be talking about the coldness of the air a little bit later on and how to mitigate against that. But if you can sleep in that way, it's much better than sleeping in a room where there are more than one person's breathing in the same exhaled air over and over. Hope that's making sense. Shallow breathing and tissue operation. So we see here stomach, liver, lungs, and brain are suffering for want of deep, full inspiration of air, which would electrify the blood and impart to it a bright, lively color, which alone can keep it pure and give tone and vigor to every part of the living machinery. All right, so let's talk about those again. Stomach. Do you want your stomach to work better? If your stomach has a good supply of oxygenated blood, about 21% of inhaled air, fresh air it is comprised of oxygen. Your liver, your lungs, your brain, these all depend on oxygen to keep keep them alive and to keep the tissues working properly. So when the blood has oxygen in it, it has a bright red color. If you know the difference between deoxygenated blood that's returning from the body, coming back up to the heart to be pumped to the lungs to receive oxygen again, to then come back and be carried to all of the body and distributed to the bodily tissues, you'll know that there's a big difference in color. All right. Oxygenated blood, bright red. Blood that's deoxygenated or used up, generally darker red. All right. But there's something important here that I want to touch on, and that is about the electrified air. Here's something that's very key. Leaves generate negative air ions. I came across this information some years ago, and I'm trying to find the exact information, but I'm unable to. But I found something very similar. So these negative air ions, NAIs, act as natural air purifiers, increasing the concentration of negatively charged molecules in the air. And this process, from such processes like transpiration and photosynthesis. And these ions improve air quality by binding to dust, bacteria, and allergens, causing them to settle, which is often called the Leonard effect when water is involved. So, isn't this amazing? Trees, the countryside, the air there is much better and sometimes has up to 200% more negative air ions than air which is in urban areas. Isn't that great? So your plants are your friends, having them in the surroundings and breathing in this negatively charged air is very good for you. And there are certain trees that just just the scent of them to your lung tissue can be healing. One of such is the cedar. All right. I was in a situation where I had to be in Moko for some time in the hills of Moko. And I can tell you the cedar tree at first, we were like, man, that smells so bad. But after a while, you get to appreciate the scent of the cedar. And that has a medicinal effect upon the very lungs. All right. So I know in Jamaica, we often, some persons say, you smell like cedar tree as a disrespect. But I tell you, you get to appreciate a cedar tree smell and how good that can be for your health. But even outside of that, just the very fact that you have leaves in the air, they create what is called negative air ions, which bind to allergens and dust and create a pure air situation for you and I. All right. So if get out of the cities, if you can get into a more rural situation, get among trees. All right. The city life has nothing on the country life. If you can take an often excursion out of the city to the country areas where your lungs will just be happy and will be repaying you for that. Let's talk a little bit more about improper dress having to do with respiration. What could be the link? Here on your screen, you have what we call short shorts. All right. But what happens here with the habitual wearing of such a thing and like garments, the extremities become chilled, especially the long legs, which are further away from the body than it's not in the trunk area or in the torso area. And they need to be covered because the colder they are, the less the circulation, the more constricted blood vessels become, and the less serviced these tissues and muscles of the extremities are served. All right. So the heart fails in its effort and the limbs become habitually cold, and the blood which is chilled away from the extremities is thrown back upon the lungs and brain. And the inflammation and congestion of the lungs or brain is the result. So we have natural body temperature, which helps to heighten the temperature of the returning blood. But I can tell you, if you keep your limbs uncovered for too long, or habitually you're doing this, there is a disparity in trunk level temperature and returning blood. And you're throwing that difference in temperature of blood upon the lungs, upon the brain, these organs of the axial part of the body or the trunk region, right? And that can create a situation of inflammation, congestion of the lungs or the brain. All right. If the limbs and feet could have extra coverings, usually that's put upon the shoulders, lungs, and heart, and healthy circulation be induced to the extremities, the vital organs will act their part healthfully with only their share of clothing. All right. So our organs can work better. Our organs can work better if we dress healthfully. All right. There are things like peripheral artery disease and things, like venous insufficiency that can affect people. Both artery and veins can be affected. Some of that, there's a genetic predisposition, but remember what we do. Lifestyle determines how soon or if ever many of these genetic traits are expressed. All right. I'm happy about that. That not just because there's a gene means that you're doomed, but if the lifestyle is like the switch that turns on what is already there. All right. So take note. A note on infants. When it comes to like infants, the arms being naked expose the infant to constant cold. Generally, people know this and the congestion of the lungs or brain. These exposures prepare the way for the infant to become sickly and dwarf. So, cover them up, cover them, keep them warm. Remember, those extremities need coverage to keep it warm to encourage better circulation. All right, we're going to go on to now care of the respiratory organs. Here are some, and there are some tips coming from the book. Morning exercise, walking in the free, invigorating air of heaven or cultivated flowers. All right. And before the morning air can get polluted by smog and many other things, catch it. All right. If you can walk in the morning and get that invigorating air, if you can have an outdoor gym preferred to an indoor gym, all right. Things like that. Let's move on. Fruits and vegetables are necessary to a healthful circulation of the blood. It is a sure safeguard against colds, coughs, congestion of the brain, inflammation of the liver, the kidneys, and the lungs, and 100 other diseases. So this is preventative medicine. A lot of times it's when people get sick that they say, okay, let me take something to get back sick. But how about preventing that? By having a lot of fruits and vegetables that is necessary for healthful circulation and the health of the blood vessels themselves. A walk, even in winter, would be more beneficial to the health than of all medicines that doctors may prescribe. There will be increased vitality, which is necessary to health. The lungs will have needful action, for it is impossible to go out in the bracing air of a winter's morning without inflating the lungs. All right? Get that fresh air in. Your lungs will thank you for it. In the cool of the evening, it may be necessary to guard from chilliness by extra clothing, but they should give their lungs air. Many labor under the mistaken idea that if they have taken cold, they must carefully exclude the outside air and increase the temperature of their room until it is excessively hot. The system may be deranged, the pores closed by waste matter, and the internal organs suffering more or less inflammation because the blood has been chilled back from the surface and thrown upon them. We talked about that earlier on. At this time of all others, the lungs should not be deprived of pure air. So when people are sick, it's not a good idea to deprive the lungs of pure air or fresh air. If pure air is ever necessary, it is when any part of the system, as lungs or stomach, is diseased. I remember in the COVID time, um, persons were being admitted to hospital in droves. Now, COVID had two phases, an acute respiratory phase, but secondarily, there was what we call an inflammatory vascular phase, where the clotting issues come back and even a cytokine storm kind of effect that happens a couple of days later on. But most persons were just inside a room. No, I wouldn't blame anyone because it was pretty novel, but these things were always there to tell us that get out into the open air. The sick person, the invalid, needs it more than even when they weren't sick. All right? If you're in a hospital situation, Remember your vitamin D. Remember your vitamin C's. All right, these are great. And by many research, we don't need to research, but the research shows that these things help you to recover. So if you can say, hey, can I be pushed outside for a moment? All right, you need that. You need the sunlight. You need that sunshine. You need to have pure air coming in instead of just being in that situation, breathing in the same old air over and over. And we know what was the result for a lot of these persons. All right, before I close out this evening's topic is very to the point. Next week we get into something so exciting, and it talks about the number one killer of mankind is cardiovascular disease. And next we'll be talking about the heart and circulation. But I have some things here for you, a little bonus. And this bonus, I consulted with Master Herbalist Cherise Williamson. I asked her, tell me some herbs that I can share with the people that are very good for your lungs. And she said, sure. And she just started talking. I said, hold on, let me get my pen and I got them and I want to share them with you. Now, she may be on next week, so I encourage you to come on and get some good stuff as well. But here we go. Just some lung health herbs that can help you to care for your lungs. There's one called lungwort. Look at the name of it, lungwort, and look at the botanical name, Pulmonaria officinalis. It's all about lung. I didn't know something is called lungwort. What? All right. So a lot of times people see these and they would say, okay, I'm going to buy this. But I would encourage you, if you have a natural health practitioner or a care provider in your corner, to reach out to them and have guidance in the use of these herbs, especially if you have other conditions that can make the situation a bit more complex. All right. But this herb is primarily used to treat respiratory conditions. Okay. Um, Such as coughs, bronchitis, asthma due to the mucilage content, which helps soothe irritated airways and act as an expectorant. Now, to expectorate is to cough up mucus and to get it out of the system. All right. It is often prepared as tea or tinctures, as is traditionally used for digestive issues and also topically for wound healing through scientific, though scientific evidence is, they're going to say limited. Many of these things that we share with you here, mankind has not yet even begin to study them out, but we know that these things are definitely documented for our benefit. All right. Just want to pause here and look in the chat. It says the tights and tight jeans as well. Okay. Definitely. The tight jeans and tights, what they do, it's the same thing. They compress the circulatory vessels. All right. Not only the torso, I know I talk mainly about restricting the healthy action of respiration, but also it applies in other areas of the body. Let's talk about another one, the mullein herb. All right, it's a traditional herb and remedy primarily used to support respiratory health. Have you ever heard of it? Acting as an expectorant to loosen mucus and soothe coughs, bronchitis, and sore throats. Its leaves and flowers are commonly consumed as tea or tincture, while oil infusions are used to treat ear infections. Someone is asking in the chat if these are locally grown. Not, no, not a lot of them. All right, I'm unaware of many of them being locally grown, but you can get them, the ones that aren't locally grown, you can, by God's grace, get them in a health food store, which is awesome. But we have locally grown ones, and the number one of them all, which is garlic. Garlic is the most studied and the most bioactive of all. It's not a herb, but it really is a spice. Technically, it is a spice, but this is number one. There is no other food which has more medicinal properties proven than garlic. Garlic is the champion and the number one in terms of its medicinal effects on the body. All right. So we know that we're not even talking about heart health and circulation and lowering blood cholesterol and lowering blood pressure. We're actually talking about respiratory health, and still garlic shines through. All right. So garlic is a potent natural remedy for respiratory infections due to its high levels of allicin. And there's also another one called alliin. This didn't say so, an antibacterial antiviral compound released when it is crushed and allowed to be exposed to air. Okay. It helps to boost the immune system and reduce the severity of colds and flus. All right. So garlic is awesome. And the skill usage of garlic can take you a very far way in maintaining your health. Okay. Okay. Someone talking about in the chat, I want to say this to you. The strangest sight I've ever seen is a driver whose windows of a vehicles are closed and the person is wearing a mask. All right. So we get and I still see persons wearing masks and remember that you want to be breathing freely as quickly as you can. Surgical mask in a surgical situation is a barrier method for the open area. You don't want to have saliva getting into it and so on. Other masks such as N95, rebreather mask is to protect you from very small particles in areas where you may be at risk. But coming out of this mask a wearing time, a lot of persons still habitually wear masks. And you are, by nature, we're taking something which should actually be for a moment and making it consistent. All right. And that is something to consider as well. If that is not a subtle health destroying practice. Let's go on. Here's another one, fenugreek. You have both the seeds and the herb. Is a traditional herb and remedy used to support respiratory health by acting as a natural expectorant to clear mucus, ease cough, and soothe inflamed airways. It is rich in mucilage. It is often used for bronchitis, congestion, asthma, sore throats, although high-quality human clinical trials are there's limited. All right, so you'll always hear that. Another thing I want to share with you here is the onion poultice. And this I've tried many times and I've had great success. All right. An onion chest poultice is a traditional folk remedy used to help relieve chest congestion. And I've tried this on not tried, I've used this on my children in times when they are respiratory challenged by illnesses. And definitely you can see great results. But you need a carrier oil such as olive oil to put on the skin. And you want to beat that and hammer that onion, and you want to have it in a cloth poultice, and you want to put it on the chest. It definitely helps. Even a cut onion placed in the room helps to purify the air and help them to breathe easier. All right. So definitely we have these things to our benefit. So this is my last slide and I want to share it with you. And it's a question, why do you hack and spit? Think about it. In Jamaica, we say hawk and spit. If you should now take a run, if you're seated and you should take a run, or you had to play football or just take a run for some purpose, you'll realize that you hack and you spit naturally. And that's because cold air, it acts as an irritant, causing the lungs to produce more phlegm. All right. And this is natural. All right. If you have to get up and run, if you're not an athlete, of course, if you're an athlete, it probably won't happen because your body has gotten used to it. But if for some reason you are able to just hack and spit habitually, you can just provide that phlegm. I'm walking behind persons a lot of time and they just hack and spit. I'm like, oh my God. Oh, oh, I have a very strong stomach, but that thing. All right. So if you can just do that at any time, if you can just provide mucus on demand, then you need to pay attention to your lungs. All right. You definitely need to pay attention to, as that excess mucus could be a sign of an inflamed lung situation. All right. It's not normal to be able to have your lungs just consistently and in a chronic fashion producing mucus. That's a sick situation. The lungs are sick and need to be cared for. All right. I want to share with you here from the chat, and I want to thank our presenter last week for providing me with this. She's just providing me with some local herbs for colds, roasted sour orange with salt and or honey, John Charles, Quaco bush, fever grass, leaf of life, and citrus leaf. Definitely awesome stuff. Leaf of life is great. My son eats it from he was a boy, so he has a palate for it. All right, but leaf of life, you see, even in many of these herbs, there is like a clue. You can see it looks like lung, right? Someone said, I'm learning something new tonight. I thought it was hawk. All right. So, John Charles often combined with fever grass is to treat tough chest colds. I want you to take note of that. All right. Um, we live in a situation where we all want to be healthy. But one thing is definitely sure. People are showing up to the hospitals, to the doctor more consistently than back in the day. Humanity could be more frail, but I think a part of it is that we've lost the art and the science of treating some things with home remedies. We've lost that. And so parents are very anxious. And so for things that our grandmothers and mothers would say, that's easy. This generation is resorting to, carry the children often to the doctor. No, it's best to err on the side of caution if you're not aware in how to use these things. Yes, definitely. But a lot of times we see where overtreatment can result in more sickness for someone who is just going through something, all right, which would pass temporarily. It's transient. And antibiotics are given like the staple nowadays. And so you find a child being subjected to so much antibiotic injections and exposure when they could just simply be helped at home, observed, and if and helped. So seek that information, all right? Learn these things that we're talking about because they're very life changing, all right? Guinea hen weed. I'm here being told in the chat again. The strong smelling herb. I have a lot in the backyard. Been used for immune system support. Can you identify the guinea hen weed? And many of these things you can tell that they are medicinal and because they're very highly aromatic. All right. And it's used for immune system support, pain relief, and reducing inflammation associated with colds. And the leaves of it can be placed on the chest, head for a headache, and leaves can be used to make teas. All right. So we have a community. We want to have that communal kind of effect where I can share with you what worked for me. You can share with me what worked for you. And together we can be stronger. Together we can apply these things and actually have better health. All right, let me stop my share. I think I've ended it. All right, so let me just jump on over here. Okay, we do not have any comments or questions on YouTube, so we're going to be closing off this evening. So I hope that this evening was a blessing for you, that you learned something new and as foundational as we prepare to get into next week, which is a topic you do not want to miss. All right, the number one killer on all mankind is cardiovascular disease. We're talking about strokes, heart attack, lung attack. We're talking about so many attacks in the body. Almost every organ can have an attack. All right. And keeping that cardiovascular system nice and free is a key to life. Most sudden deaths are cardiovascular issues. All right. So it's something that's very important. I hope this evening blessed you as we talked about lungs and respiration. It may seem simple, but remember that it is sometimes the simple things that are your greatest blessings when we institute them.